Welcome back to another riveting. See what I did there? What if? I never know how many rivets are in Titanic. People ask me that sometimes. Today we are tackling the iconic Captain Smith. If if he was not, as we see in the 1997 film and in other adaptations as well, the stoic leader going down with his ship, lost in the cold sea that night in 1912, if for some reason he had managed to survive, and we'll discuss what circumstances those might have been under, how would the legacy of Titanic have changed if the ship went down, but its captain did not? This is a big one because we are, as we've discussed on other what ifs, as Titanic people, constantly enamored with and sort of mulling through these visions we have of people like Smith, people like Bruce Ismay, people like Thomas Andrews. They're iconic. Their actions have been scrutinized over and over again for well over 100 years at this point. So let's fan fiction Captain Smith and we'll pluck him from the ship. And he manages to board Carpathia safely. And what happens after that? What happens after that, Pablo? Let's look at the circumstances at hand. So, if we have a captain that does not go down with his ship, would he have replaced immediately Ismay as the chief object of public fury?
I think so. I think I hate to be so sort of two-dimensional about this, but I think it is almost you can literally just take Ismay out and put Smith in. Even though, of course, as we say, in every what if we are only changing one thing. So Ismay still survives in this what if, but I just think that the captain surviving supersedes everything. It is
Mhm.
just the ultimate betrayal in the eyes of the public, the media. And so, yeah, I think everything that happened to Ismay happens to Smith and then some.
And what is the like what's interesting is the legacy of the idea of a captain going down with their ship. I mean, it's a very romantic notion, right? So this becomes one of the kind of romantic things in the tragedy of Titanic is that this long beloved millionaire's captain, well-known captain, E.J. Smith goes down with his ship. And by doing that, a captain going down the ship, it's supposed to signify this ultimate responsibility for the vessel and on board. Like I'm going to be the first one on when we launch. I'm going to be the last one off if we sink. That there is this expectation that they will oversee the evacuation of all the passengers and even the crew, and then be the last crew member off. Historically, it's I think in terms of maritime history, there's probably a lot of nuanced ways to look at it, and we don't have time to unpack the complete history of that. But I think it's safe to say it's been a pretty consistent expectation across naval and maritime history that the captain stays on board to the very end, from my understanding at least.
I think that's true, but I think, and it also ties in very strongly to something that I feel like I'm a bit of a broken record because I'm now, as we've said, the resident Brit, but it does tie in to what was incredibly strong then, sort of still is today, that sort of British sense of stoicism, the stiff upper lip, the kind of sense of duty that was really, it is inherited in sort of British society and certainly in kind of Edwardian time, that idea of duty, of class, honor, especially among the military, the navy, you know, they are interlinked. That idea of kind of service and captaining a ship, the moral order, like all of that is interlinked, and so I think the kind of narrative of the captain going down with the ship, I think would have just been such. it would have been moral panic actually for British society. I honestly think even today it would be difficult, but back then I think people would have I think it would have really rocked the whole of the UK.
People's
I
sense
think
of ethics and morals and
yeah, I think it would have just questioned not to take this too much of a tangent, but one of the things that is has always been part of the UK's kind of culture is this idea that we have quite a strong moral compass. And which sounds like an odd thing to say when you think about the British history. Like we've also had some pretty dark moments. But today, for example, I say this a lot in my job in politics, which is that we don't have the strongest military in the world. We're not like America. We don't have these huge military budgets with these massive army of soldiers. But we are a moral compass, and people do look to the UK to see what happens. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the whole of Europe and actually a lot of the world looked immediately to the United Kingdom. And, full credit to our Prime Minister at the time, Boris Johnson, who I would not normally defend, but that's for another podcast. He immediately backed Ukraine. He immediately started supplying weapons and arms and support and training. Like we didn't blink before we picked a side in that war. And the rest of Europe and the rest of the world was like, got it. Okay, we're with them. Like that's their decision. And so we do kind of provide that moral clarity. And I think that is a very historic kind of British culture. It's very embedded in our society. And it's not directly linked, but these things all kind of interlink together. This idea that we don't always get it right, but we do try to provide a kind of clear kind of moral objective and we do what we think is right. And I think it does stem back to World War One and World War Two. Like it is a very kind of it's a defining moment, of course, in the world, but in particular in kind of the UK and Europe. The presence and the decisions that we took to defend Poland and Europe. And so I think it speaks to that same sort of values-based judgment that if Captain Smith survives, like the whole foundations of British society basically collapses because that is not meant to happen. The UK, Britain sticks up for its allies, the same way that we stuck up for Poland, the same way we're sticking up for Ukraine. I think it would cause such panic across the whole country. And it sounds so weird to say this, but I really believe that it would have been like the country would have just collapsed. We would have just not, it's like taking away queuing. You
would
can't
it
do
have,
it. The Brits love to queue. You can't do that to us.
would it have been different in the public mind if he survived by like floating on a piece of debris and kind of being picked up by a lifeboat after the sinking versus him getting on a lifeboat? That would probably be very different, right? Too, like if he
Yeah.
went down with the ship but somehow survived in the water and say, the Lowe's boat came out and found him and picked him up and put him in a lifeboat, maybe unconscious even, would that make any difference?
Definitely how he survives makes a difference. I think if it is anything like Ismay, then the survival is seen, as I say, as like a complete collapse of British society. The whole world has gone to pot. That kind of, stoic officer class, the British masculinity, that's all gone. I think if he is just found, as you say, like floating on debris, or he's found unconscious, or he's dragged into a lifeboat, that's very different. Um, I think it's still probably rocky, because I think the phrase is go down with the ship. I think that, you're just expected to do that. But for sure, if it's Ismay style, it's big trouble. If it's anything else, maybe it's slightly kind of more nuanced. But that kind of
Definitely good news for Bruce Ismay, though.
it's great news for Bruce Ismay. And I mean, in fact, you can look at what happened to Ismay and just the outrage on both sides of the Atlantic. But when you look at the media coverage in the aftermath of Titanic and what was directed at Ismay in the UK versus US, the UK just eviscerated him. He was abs If you look at some of the reports in the media after Titanic sank, the way he was treated, it's extraordinary when you think about it, because he is just a human at the end of the day, but he was absolutely, I mean, we know he was vilified, but he was ripped to shreds because the
Right.
idea that a British person would do that was just, the Brits just couldn't handle it. And so that kind of British courage at sea, the kind of the cultural trauma, it would just shatter what Brits see themselves as. And so it's good news for Ismay, bad news for for Britain and for Smith, unless, as you say, he's found floating on debris or something like that. But then even then, I think I wonder to myself whether he might have been expected to go back and do something more, like go and all those stories of him like handing children into lifeboats and things like that. I think that he would have been expected to basically just keep going until the end.
Well, and we of course there are some reports that he basically disappears partway through the night. And historians and just observers, writers, anyone, a lot of people have pulled out from that narrative that he sort of pieced out at some point on the whole
Yeah.
process, maybe because of emotional turmoil and guilt and a panic attack, anxiety. The scene in the 97 movie very likely could be what happened, that at some point he just feels so distraught by what he has wrought or been part of, what he has been part of making happen, and he just goes in somewhere and lets the water take him over. And I think that's unfortunately kind of a realistic sense of what might have happened. He does seem to disappear from the narrative at some point in the night, but in other narratives, we have him staying very active. I can't, if I find the direct reference, I can put it in the show notes, but there is one lifeboat who claims to have seen him in the water delivering babies to the lifeboat at the very end. And there is even one anecdote where someone offers him a space in a lifeboat and he says no, and he keeps swimming. But I don't know how many of those stories are real versus just, a sensationalist account that someone felt like giving to a newspaper, or maybe they convinced themselves it was true. But I don't know that I necessarily believe those stories from that night. It's possible. I don't think that he would have ever considered getting in a lifeboat. I imagine he hoped that a ship would make it to them in time, obviously, to get everybody off and onto another ship. But we won't ever really know what Smith was up to completely that night. We know a few things, and I would recommend people go to the book On a Sea of Glass for, if you want like a minute by minute of where we know Captain Smith was, obviously that's the book to go to for that.
Which is it's funny because that taps into one of the biggest sort of additions to Titanic's legacy, I suppose, is that we have Captain Smith. We then have his first-hand account of what happened, which is probably the most significant first-hand account we could
Oh, that would
possibly
be the most
have.
significant thing that
When you
came
think
out of it.
about, yeah,
Yeah.
when you think about those inquiries,
For this
you
what
know,
if, that's the most significant thing.
yeah, it must be. I mean, he would have been, forget Ismay, forget everybody else, forget all of those other officers who were, even the lookouts, like, forget all of that. The grilling that Smith would have had in those inquiries on both sides of the Atlantic, he would have been forced to account for the speed, the ignored iceberg warnings, the lack
The
of drill,
increased
the
increased
lifeboat.
number of accidents that he's been a part
Yeah,
of. I mean, at
yeah.
this point, he has
Suddenly, that's a really good point. So suddenly all of those little kind of near misses he's had are a big deal. So they're sort of brushed away. Like everyone goes, oh, it's unblemished. Actually, there were a
this,
few, he
this
had a few
big
moments.
he faced criminal charges.
Yeah. Yes. The locked gates, question mark, did
Or if he does admit to listening to Ismay and being unduly influenced by any of that stuff, that could be viewed as criminal as well, criminal
yeah.
negligence.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think there's a very real scenario in which through the framing of the inquiries, Smith is not just a coward, but the architect of the disaster. I mean, he could possibly become, bigger than anything, bigger than the iceberg. Like he is what sank Titanic because he is now symbolizes the human failure, the systemic neglect, everything that went wrong. is
Mhm.
him. And as I say, like I think it's almost too simple to say, but it is almost like you just swap Ismay for Smith
Yeah,
and,
it's very
add a
simple
whole
and
moron,
I
you
think it's
know?
a very similar, like, what if after I mean, after the sinking and everything dies down in the immediate aftermath, I think you have a similar fate. Smith would have a similar fate that Ismay ended up having if he was the one that was the scapegoat. I'm sure living life largely in isolation, not working anymore, not being in the milieu anymore. If he somehow escaped criminal charges, then I think he just kind of fades into probably keeps to himself, doesn't give interviews, wishes it all would go away, probably dies pretty lonely and sad. I hate to say that, but I think he just has Ismay's fate in that sense if he survives.
Yeah, and I think the tabloids have a field day. The media are absolutely overjoyed with it because I mean that sells like nothing else. I mean, Ismay obviously, as we know, is the villain, but even better than that, even better than the chairman of the White Star Line, it's the captain. So I mean, they sell papers for forever. They
Yeah.
have the time of their lives. Cartoons mock him, headlines rip him to pieces. I think all those kind of, yeah, all the scorn that was directed at Ismay is directed at Smith and tenfold.
And they grill, I mean, the inquiries would grill him on, as you point out, everything over speed, iceberg warnings, lack of drills, crew confusion. He would have had to answer to all of that because he was the captain. And this may be an unpopular opinion, but just I mean, I've spent years reading about this, and I've got to say, I see some holes in his behavior and what he prioritized in the days leading up to Titanic and on Titanic. He was the captain of that ship, and I think if you look at something like a lack of lifeboat drills, you'd have to look directly to him, and that was a mistake. And I get in trouble with people when I bring this up, but I do think Captain Smith made some mistakes. And I do think there was a chance he was sort of skating at that point on his general reputation and
Yeah.
experience as he got older.
And I think that would be amplified and perhaps exaggerated by the inquiries. I think, as I said, the UK society would not be able to handle it. So I think the inquiry would be just a disaster for him there. But the US one would what well was and would want to continue shifting blame over to the UK side. So the US inquiries would shift blame on him because he was the British captain of a British ship that just, he survived and killed 1,500 people. The UK one would be, as I say, just a disaster because he has kind of let everyone down in British society. He's kind of collapsed the country. So I think on both sides of the Atlantic, he is absolutely eviscerated, much more so than Ismay ever was. And as you say, probably faces criminal charges. I was thinking about Costa Concordia, which is a sort of similar-ish scenario. Obviously, didn't kill
Yeah,
1,500
we
people.
brought it up before. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but he was the captain of Costa Concordia. I'm gonna concede that I don't know how many people would died or were harmed, but he was charged with manslaughter, abandoning the ship and causing a shipwreck, and he was convicted. I 15, 16 years. Like he got a decent, you know, prison sentence.
32 deaths.
Okay, so I mean
30,
nothing compared to Titanic, you know.
but there were obviously many, many more people on board and many were injured as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting comparison. Obviously, that was ironically 2012, so 100 years later. But it's an interesting comparison when you think about the persecution that Captain Smith might have faced. I think it would have been very difficult to avoid any sort of criminal action, and it would have been, in a slightly alternative world, it would be fascinating to see the bust up between Smith and Ismay on the whole speed thing, because that is one of those, that is one of the big what
Well,
if.
that's true because Ismay does survive. So in this what if, the only thing we're changing is Captain Smith also surviving. So you do then get them at the inquiries together debating, and then all the newspapers have a fucking field day.
Yeah.
And well, you know what? I did just change the rating of this podcast recently to explicit. So I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna leave
Great.
it. I'm gonna leave it in. I'm so proud of it. Um, in related news, if you to listen with children. We're adapting. I'm not going to ever say anything too crazy, but I'm sort of sick of editing myself. So if the stray F-bomb, as we call it here in just have to deal with it. Yeah, so we would see them having it out, which would be incredibly
I
interesting.
mean, that itself, actually, when you think about a huge part of Titanic's legacy, which is, of course, the media and popular culture stuff. Obviously, you have James Cameron's film, you have all the stuff in the aftermath, all the books, all the TV shows, musicals, so on and so forth. Um, maybe there is a fantastic courtroom drama to be made of the back and forth between Smith and Ismay, because that is going to end up being fiery. Presumably, White Star Line, brings them into a room and smashes their heads together and tries to get them to come to a line on it. But ultimately, they're both fighting for survival. They're both going to be shifting blame onto the other person. So there could be some fiery and explosive moments in the courtroom that could, enhance and kind of add to Titanic's media and kind of popular culture legacy, which is already huge, but could be even
Net
larger.
Netflix series, Smith
Oh,
is May.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I can see it. And in terms of, but that ties into in terms of like a next bullet point, like the long-term legacy. So instead of memorials and statues, Smith becomes this living cautionary tale, right? So tell me, like everything would be affected. Like no statues,
yeah.
no memorials of him, no eulogies of him. But then the films would be different. Like we just said, the film, that's what made me think of it. The film adaptations of like his story would be so different. So his role in all of these iconic movies, Night to Remember, James Cameron's Titanic, would be so different.
Yeah. Well, I think I mean, they all become even more dramatic. I mean, how many times have we said that Titanic is like the ultimate soap opera? Like every walk of life is on there, every race, every gender, just like everything. Like that is why Titanic appeals to so many people because wherever you are, whatever stage, wherever you are in the world, wherever you come from, there's someone on there that you can sort of, associate with. And, you add into that this additional, really sensationalist, bit of gossip, basically. Like it becomes, as Titanic is so much gossip, so much like he said, she said, they did this, that, whatever. And now you have the ultimate betrayal. You have like the worst thing that a captain could ever do is ram his ship into an iceberg, kill 1,500 people, and survive himself. That would have. I think the films, everything, are just bigger than they even are now,
Very
which is
brazen.
which kind of seems insane to even think about because you know James Cameron has already made this film Titanic, speaking today, which like took over the world and continues to, pull in huge audiences. The idea of it being even bigger seems kind of, the idea of her media legacy, pop culture legacy being even bigger seems unbelievable. I think it probably would be.
Yeah, because it would also include this back and forth, this moral question of who was more to blame, Ismay or Smith, White Star Line using potentially Smith as some sort of scapegoat for like the corporate
Yeah.
culture. We've talked about that before on one of these episodes. So it might even, this is one of the rare what ifs we've done where the result might be an even more intense cultural legacy, like maybe even more.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you're right about the sort of White Star Line's sort of legacy. I don't know that White Star Line survives. They probably, as I say, they probably try to shift blame onto Smith. They try and do that, but I mean, this makes it even worse for White Star Line. So in a sense, it makes Titanic's legacy bigger, but I think it speeds up White Star Line's demise. I think having the captain of one of your ships and also very revered. Like remember at the time that people loved him. He was the
Million.
captain everyone wanted to be with. Yeah, the millionaire's captain to have your flagship captain on your flagship ship behave in that way, I think White Star Line is down the drain even faster than they were. So um, it's good news for Ismay, bad news for Smith, bad news for White Star Line. Um,
such bad news that if I did want to bring up something fun, and I had forgotten to put it in the notes, but I pulled it out of my notes from another episode. Um, So much so, like if Captain Smith had survived, it would have been such a nightmare for everybody involved that some, you're about to laugh, but some conspiracy theorists think that he actually did survive. And I don't think that, but there is this tiny segment of Titanic people that think he did because there was a supposed sighting of him after the sinking. Do you know this?
I actually don't think I
Okay.
did.
I did an episode that involved when I did my Captain Smith episode, so I dug up my information from that. But there is a persistent urban legend that Edward J. Smith, captain of Titanic, was sighted in Baltimore, Maryland, years after the ship sank.
Oh,
The story goes that a man named James W. Chesley, a Baltimore lawyer, claimed to have seen Captain Smith walking through the streets of Baltimore in the 1920s. According to Chesley, Smith appeared much older but was unmistakably him. Chesley apparently tried to approach him, but Smith hurried away. He even went to the same place the next day to try to find him and saw him again, and he ran away again. There's no credible evidence to support this claim. Obviously, it's quite evident that Captain Smith went down with the Titanic. There were never any other sightings. People consider it like a myth or a misunderstanding. Probably, I mean, the story is that this Chesley guy knew him and had worked with him in the past. And so maybe his brain just, did a weird little thing there. But to his dying day, the Chesley guy insisted that he had seen him. And so some people
yeah, I
do,
don't buy that.
yeah, some people do latch on to this, right? Like if he had survived, that would have spelled such disaster for everybody that they would have hidden him away. But I just, this is why I've never even entertained the ideas of like, oh, the moon landing's a hoax or whatever, because there is this thing called human fallibility, and humans are incapable of keeping secrets. And I just do not believe that if Captain Smith had survived, that many people could have kept that
Yeah.
secret. You'd have deathbed confessions, you'd have more sightings. Um, you just would. So, which it's interesting. And the reason I was thinking about this is I was listening to a podcast about thematically this very thing. And what's interesting is like here in the US, we have Roswell and like the mysterious areas out in like the west part of the United States where supposedly they have done alien like experiments, Area 51, things like this. This is where aliens supposedly came down. And for years and years and years, it's been conceived of as truly just a conspiracy theory, no weight to it, right? But now that as some of the people who were part of it allegedly are dying, we're having these deathbed confessions from people that they were involved with it. And I just think that with any major conspiracy, if you don't have the phenomenon of a deathbed confessions, then there's no way that was ever real. So I can't imagine that was real. But I just thought I would bring it up for fun, because it is. I mean, we're talking what if anyway. So like, but I do think it's so compelling that we have this like potential Captain Smith ghost story there, and his ghost pops up a lot, like supposedly his old house in this is in Staffordshire, but his old house is supposedly haunted. Apparently his old house flooded a bunch of times and people like read into that. There is the story of a man being out at sea on a big ocean liner in like I think this story is from the 1940s or 1950s, and he runs into a captain on the ship who, tells him like what to do to survive if, something happens. It's like the middle of a storm or something. And nothing happened. The man gets off the ship, but like months later, he's at a friend's office and sees a photo of the man that he talked to on the ship. And supposedly it's Captain Smith. And the guy's like, oh no, that's the crew from the Titanic. It's an old photo. Anyway, there are all these stories that circulate for years. So much so that I did an episode at one point called, I think, like Captain Smith's Ghost. But he definitely haunts the whole story because people wish he would have survived so we could know more about what happened. And I think people think he's haunting places because deep down they wish they had a sense of like what his end looked like or what really happened. People want to know what really happened. What was really on Smith's mind when he chose to not slow down? Did he listen to Ismay? What was going through his brain as the ship was going down? I think we just want to know these things. And so we decide that he's haunting this or that.
Two things. You've said something there which has made me think of two things. One, which is that I don't necessarily agree with this, but a lot of the kind of exhibitions and museums have, like dress up Captain Smiths as sort of their like, their captains, their kind of what do you call them? Those people, they have them at football matches. They're sort of like, what do you call them? You're gonna have to edit this out because I don't know what the fuck word I'm thinking of. What's that thing when they're like,
Describe it more.
when you go to football and they have like a character and it's like their
Mascot?
mascot.
Okay.
Okay, so what was I saying? So you said something which made me think of two things, and one of them is that Captain Smith is often, you see him at those exhibitions and tours and museums. They have them as like their sort of like mascot. They kind of like people dress up as like Captain Smith.
Dressed up. People are dressed
So
up
I
like
guess
cosplay.
that's lost because no one is dressing up as Ismay right now. Like you don't see. Um, so I guess that bit is lost. But then I thought something a bit more significant actually, which is that you just said there about well, we've talked about Smith surviving. We get all of this first-hand testimony. We get an incredible amount more information about what happened. And as you say, so much of Titanic right now is what was he thinking? Did the conversation about speed really happen? Why didn't he slow down? Why weren't the ice warnings taken seriously? All that sort of stuff. Um, does it diminish Titanic? So we've talked that Titanic's legacy is blown up because of this, right? As in the sense that like it gets even bigger. But if you take away all of those what ifs and you take away all of that myth, all of the legend, all of the kind of what ifs, all of the kind of, why didn't he do that? Does it diminish the story instead? So with like I was so confident in the beginning, being like, oh my God, Titanic's legacy is even bigger. But if you take away all of that, and we now know as much as we could ever know that this conversation did happen. That didn't happen. He didn't slow down because of this. He didn't change course because of that. He did get that warning, but not this one. He didn't react to this, but he did that. Is it suddenly not that interesting because actually we know everything? Is part of Titanic's legacy that we don't know everything? And it
Possible.
is, I
Yeah.
mean, the fact that we've got a whole series called What If because there are so many what ifs in
But if
Titanic
he
story.
survived, we wouldn't have to do a what if about it. Anything.
So yeah, I'm kind of contradicting myself because at the beginning I was so confident that this would, expand Titanic's legacy, but
Maybe
maybe
not.
maybe not.
Hmm.
There you go.
I don't know. He sort of becomes, yeah, he becomes the villain. He takes Ismay's spot as like the mustache twirling villain. And the million, then they would roast him for being the millionaire's captain.
Yeah.
They would roast him that he was at the Widener dinner the night before and maybe
Well,
drinking.
those things, I mean, they were very kind of loose. I mean, I haven't really seen any serious evidence for this, but the idea that he was drunk at the time of the collision, all that sort of stuff, like,
It's like this like minute by minute debate of whether he
yeah.
had like a glass of champagne at the Widener dinner. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, the man is how old was he? 50 something years old.
On his final crossing,
On his
about to
final
retire.
crossing, he's people in that era drank a lot. Like, I
Yeah.
don't think one champagne would have made him completely incapacitated to make like people need to calm down on the like,
We
oh, if he had one drop of alcohol, he must have ruined like it takes a lot of alcohol to make someone so drunk that it inhibits, I mean, depending on your person. But like one champagne at dinner wouldn't have that didn't sink the ship. You know what I mean? And I hate when people imply that.
One of my previous jobs was working for the UK government's road safety campaigns, and as part of that job, I discovered an old advert that was run. So I used to research all sorts of different road ads, road safety ads across the world, and there was an ad run at the very, very early stages of kind of the introduction of road safety that had the tagline, "Make it six and arrive alive," as in stop at six drinks and you would still be okay to drive.
Oh, I thought you meant like at 6 o'clock p.m.
No, 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 no. So stop at six and arrive alive was like the tagline, which is
Why are
like,
people having six alcoholic drinks in one night?
Well, people used to drink a lot more, but yeah, I mean that's I'm just saying that people used to drink so much back then. But yeah, there was at one stage the idea that you should stop at 6 drinks and that would be you'd still be okay to drive, which is absolutely wild to think of now.
That's insane. I cannot I mean, I will not drive if I have one. Another reason I
Uh,
should be Scottish. I love Scotland because they have a zero tolerance policy. You cannot get
yeah,
behind the wheel of a vehicle if you have had even one drop of alcohol. I support this.
yeah,
I don't even drive if I've had one. I mean, maybe if it's like I've had one and a huge dinner and I'm going half a mile. But like that blows my mind.
yeah. It's pretty wild. But that's the, I mean, that again, it's like it's that difference in where society was then versus now. And it's also, the reaction to, and we've talked so much about the aftermath and reaction to Titanic sinking from a kind of corporate and legal and regulatory perspective. And that's a funny example of one, right? Is that at one stage it was have 6 drinks and you're okay to drive. But in this scenario, it's that, or in the real world scenario, it's that Titanic prompted practically every safety regulation that
And
we have on
just
sea today.
unrelated, and don't take any medical or life advice from me on any official record, but I would just unofficially recommend that no one drink 6 alcoholic and drive. I just want to say I think that's a really bad idea. No official advice given, but that please don't do that. That's
Yeah, it's not the one. But it would be interesting to see what the regulatory outcome from the inquiries would be and whether they I think there is a possibility that particularly in the UK, but I think the US as well, would fixate so obsessively on Smith's survival that the changes in regulations and safety and laws could be slower because this one man becomes the single reason. So it's not that there weren't enough lifeboats. It's not any of that. It was that this one man did this really terrible thing. I think they'll all still come in, but there's a possibility they come in a lot slower or a bit later because they are so fixated and so obsessed with
yeah.
this one guy surviving. A bit like with Ismay, but I think again it is just so much worse if it's the captain.
Yeah, and we probably do still have movies like Titanic 666, and maybe Captain Smith is like the evil captain that sabotages the ship. And I mean you'd have conspiracy theories like that. Like, was he working with JP Morgan to sink the ship?
Oh,
Like,
well, all the conspiracy stuff about was it sunk deliberately? I mean, that
they would
stuff.
have those people would have some evidence now, you know?
Well,
Like,
it would be on steroids, right? This idea that they swapped the ships or the captain did deliberately, or it was actually Olympic, or it's part of the whole conspiracy with the Bermuda Triangle and all. Like, it's just the whole thing is all of that would be on steroids. So, I
I
mean,
think
again, adding to the kind of pop culture media legacy of Titanic, like the sort of, her enduring fascination.
it just occurred to me while we were recording this, and we've got to dip out on this one in a minute, but I think we should do, I think we need a live show. I think we need a live unsinkable episode of What If. I do.
That's a great idea.
And I
I
think we
thought, you know
like
what I thought you were going to say? I thought you were going to say we need to do a what if on the conspiracy. Like, what if the conspiracies are real? Like, what if Titanic was swapped with Olympic?
here's some insider knowledge. I've had a piece of seaweed in my teeth this entire time. I'm gonna leave that
Uh,
in too. So I just to humanize myself. I'm gonna humanize myself. Um, no, I think we need to do. I've gotten, I've talked to a couple of places here in the U.S. Like I mentioned to you. I won't reveal those yet in case they don't work out. But I don't know. I kind of want to do one over there. I think we need like a what if in Belfast or Liverpool or Southampton. I think we need a live show what if where Titaniacs come out and they have opinions about all of this, and we could do like a couple of topics and people could pass the mic around and chime in too.
It's a
People
great
could,
idea.
people could cosplay, do some live action role
As
playing.
evil Captain Smith.
I will come as the other day I said to my daughter, I said, "Do I finally need to be Rose from Titanic for Halloween before I get too old to do it?" And she said, "Well, you're never too old because you can be her at 100." and do the like it's been 84 years. But then also, she said, but you could just be her mom. You're more like Ruth's age now. And honestly, it's true.
Or Susie.
But that's just a white t-shirt and some jeans.
Yeah, but that's very you, which is like making yours slushy, your
Yeah,
cocktail
I'll
slushy.
just make a cocktail and jeans. But no, I think maybe I'd be Ruth. That's more the bracket I'm in now. Anyway, that makes someone want to drink thoughts like that. So let's tie this up with a bow. We have, yeah, I think Captain Smith dies a sad, lonely death on dry land if this happens, potentially even with a censure or criminal um,
Well,
allegation.
I would add to that. This is really bleak, and not to I wouldn't genuinely not making light of this, but a possibility that he takes his own life because
Yeah,
I think the pressure is so incredible, and as I say, that kind of I think British society just cuts him out
and
completely.
you
I
do
think
see there, yeah, there's a huge occurrence proportionally of suicide amongst Titanic survivors as it is, and it's an unfortunate and true statistic. Yeah, I think that you ask any psychologist if that's a situation where someone will be likely to take their own life, and I think they will answer yes. So
yeah,
that's horrific to think about as well.
it's
Well,
not a great
on
legacy for
that depressing note,
him.
and again, if any of these episodes make you feel like you need some professional help, let me know. I can provide some phone numbers.
We
Um,
need to set up like a the BBC in the UK, like whenever they show an episode of something that has something disturbing on, there's always like, if you've been affected, please call this number, and they have like an action hotline that will give you like advice and they'll help you out with stuff. We're
yeah,
gonna have to have an unsinkable
unfortunately,
hotline. We're gonna have to set that up. If anyone wants to volunteer to be our our hotline, then let us
unfortunately, in
know.
the United States, a lot of these hotlines are being defunded. So
Yes.
I don't
Yeah.
know, so maybe you probably need to just pay the money and call the British one because I don't think,
You can buy a BBC license fee, so
yeah, do what you need to do.
which I would encourage anyway, because the BBC needs protecting at all costs. So.
Well, yeah. And we also have no public television anymore. Life is
Oh God,
grand.
yeah.
Um,
But apart from all of that, this has been really fun. And
been great. The downfall of society aside, this has just been such a wonderful time.
oh
And
God,
we will see you in the next one. There might be a bit of a gap after this set of episodes, but we will be back with more in the early fall for sure. My favorite that is approaching. What
we all know.
Jack Dawson was real, dude. What if he was real?
It's gonna be buckle in because
Buckle in. I have
that's
so
gonna be a
much to
marathon.
say. I have so much to say. Uh, yeah, that's gonna be fun. So we'll probably maybe come back in September with that one. And 'cause people really like the movie one. That one I released a few days before we're recording this. People really like anything to do with the movie, and I don't blame them. So I think we'll go in that direction next. Okay.
Surprise, surprise.
Surprise,
Neither of us have a problem
surprise.
talking about the film.
As you sit there in your sweatshirt. Okay. I have my Outlander sweatshirt on, which was not the right sweatshirt to wear today, but it's also one of my great loves that I obsess over. So thematically, it's okay. It's accepted. Also, should we tease to people that we may pop up in a random location sometimes?
Oh yeah. No, because is this coming out before we go? I don't think it is it? No, because we're going really soon.
No, you're right, it won't. But
So by the time people have heard this, then probably we've already been.
by the time you're listening to this, you might have seen that Pablo and I popped up in a very unlikely location looking for Titanic. And we're going to challenge ourselves to find it. And
Yeah.
I think we will, future selves. I think we will. So good.
Cue. We're going to cut in now, cue to a clip of us not having achieved this goal at all.
I know it's like that reel on Instagram. I forget the song they use where it's like, I'm hopeful, hopeful for tonight. And then like they list the things they were hoping to do and none of it. But you know what? The beauty is the process and
Yeah,
happiness.
it's the journey, not the destination.
The journey, not the destination. And happiness is often a lack of expectation. And with that, good day, Pablo.
Doesn't even make sense as an ending.